Okay, so good morning, everyone, or actually afternoon, it's 1 o'clock. But thank you for coming to the Promoting Rural Health Advocacy webinar put on by myself, Sarah Duke-Majian, the Adirondack Rural Health Network Manager, and accompanying me is Mary Rudinger from Clear the Air in the Southern Adirondacks Reality Check Specialist Program. So this is going to be a 101 advocacy program just of tips and tricks that we learned and things we've seen throughout our work on advocacy, just to give you a heads up. And then we're happy to answer as many questions or at least try to guide you in the right direction when you are in your advocacy work. And we're going to use the word advocacy loosely. I feel like I should mention that on purpose, just because Mary will go into a little further on education versus lobbying and kind of why we use it loosely, but the term is just to kind of get ready for that season. So overall today, we're going to talk about prepping for the season, executing the work during the season, and then why it's important to keep your legislators informed throughout the rest of the year. So for prepping for the advocacy season, we'll review the executive and governor's budget, education versus lobbying, a brief overview, legislative contact lists and why they're important to have, how to prepare for a meeting, and then finding advocates and advocating within the community. So the executive governor's budget. So if you look here on the right, I have a graphic that I pulled from the New York State budget website, and it just kind of goes over how they're looking at the budget throughout the year. So if you see June to September, October is when they're starting that budget preparation. September, October to December, they go into budget division review. And then November to January is when those governor's decisions are made. The big piece here would be that legislative action portion between January and March. Because the budget is normally submitted by the governor's office to the Senate Assembly around February 1st. And so I put reactionary versus preparatory. I think that's the two ways you really have to go when you're looking at advocacy. Reactionary would be the budget comes out, you see that your program's been cut or that you're concerned about your program or another, and you react to that. You set up meetings and you're kind of scrambling. And so I think scrambling is the best word there because you want to be prepared. If you show up and you're reactionary, you have a very short window of time and you're working with a large group of people who are also trying to accomplish the same thing, get those similar meetings. So preparatory is what we're aiming for, which is October to March, that third and fourth section on that execution graphic. And CASA, and Mary will probably tell you later, but CASA starts in October, works their way right through March. ARHN is a little different. We're slowly working our way back to October, but we normally would start around December, January. We are trying to incorporate a few more legislator informative pieces, which would push us back to that time. And so when you're looking at the budget, just know what you're looking for. It is confusing for those of you who have not looked at the budget yet or have never had to deal with this. It is very confusing. It's so many pages. So I think the best thing to do is know what you're called, number one. And I say that in a silly way, but Adirondack Rural Health Network is identified under Rural Health Network Development Program and Rural Health Access Hospitals. That's what we're listed under in the budget. Control F is a great friend when you're going through the budget and searching. It's a lot better than skimming with your eyes on those hundreds of pages. And then, like I mentioned before, February and March are going to be big. So February and March are going to be those times to set up those meetings with our legislators. Definitely February and early March, but make sure you're paying attention to when things are due, when the budget's released, because you don't want to go towards the end because it's going to be too late. You really want to make sure you're grabbing their attention and you are educating them to the best of your ability and making them understand why you're important in the beginning so they can keep you in mind when they're reviewing the budget.
So when you are going to meet with your legislator, you really need to look at how you're funded. For us, we are a New York State grant. So we have to really consider what is education and what is lobbying. It's a very fine line between the two, but it's critical to know that difference. Education, you're sharing that information. You can provide program updates. What have you been working on? What does this look like? How are you helping your community? Why is this an issue? Providing information on this issue, any statistics or personal stories are very useful in this time. examples of successful solutions. So in the past, this is what this state has done, or this is what we've done in New York State in the past, and this is how we have fortunately used these outcomes, or this is the positive things that we've been able to have. The history of action steps, looking for, what have we done, what have we worked up to this point, is also important as well. So for us, for example, we cannot ask for funding, but we can say we are funded at this amount, but the CDC recommendation is actually several $1,000,000 more. So that is just sharing information. We're not asking for any additional funding, but we are educating them on the problem that we are facing, and that, potentially this is something to look at. But we're not asking them to do that, which is lobbying. Lobbying is asking for any sort of result. So you're asking for dollars. My program needs X. That's not what we're looking for here. That is definitely lobbying. It can also be specific legislature. So if I was asking for, a certain tobacco law to be passed with the budget, that would not be okay. And any other outcomes that might be the direct result of an ask. You're trying to avoid swaying the legislator to the desired decision by performing that ask, and it might occur unintentionally. Sometimes in meetings, they'll be like, "Okay, well, we've met with you today. We've received this information. What do you want?" It's important to state at that time that you are just here to educate and that you're not, specifically asking for anything in particular, but that this is just an educational opportunity for the legislator.
So one of the things that we look at specifically is the legislative contact list. So the New York State Association for Rural Health hands out materials to us every advocacy season. They've looked at the budget, they've found those numbers, saves us the hassle and the struggle and the concern of going through the budget, but we're still doing it. So they do provide that. Last year, we also did kind of a Google Drive, making sure that our meetings were lining up, we weren't missing people. So they do a great job of collaborating the rural health networks and making sure that we're hitting our goals to reach our legislators. But CASA does kind of the same thing. They get a list. However, their list is identified specific to the counties which they serve. So it's important to know who these people are. ARHN also does a one step further, and we just create a hot list or representation list for our region so that we feel comfortable with who we're meeting with. And so that list is who covers our region. So the Adirondack Rural Health Network covers Clinton, Essex, Franklin, Fulton, Hamilton, Warren, and Washington counties. So looking at which legislators cover each of those regions, knowing who's covering your community is huge in and of its own. But then on top of that, majority and minority leaders, who are they for the Senate and the Assembly? Who are those key players? Identifying key committees and their chairs. So for instance, ARHN, we really work to identify those chairs as possible people to meet with during the season. If you've been doing this a while, there's a health committee, there's a transportation, a mental health committee. Find what is an important committee to you and identify them. You don't necessarily have to meet with them, but it's nice to know who they are, recognize the name, and if you can meet with them, one step further. CASA does the same thing, but they actually use that committee membership when they're meeting with people. So they take those legislators from the county, they determine what committees they're a part of, and that becomes a conversation starter and a conversation piece within their meeting to kind of get a further connection with the legislator. And so on this page, the Find Your Senator and Who is My Assembly Member, both are linked directly over to the website. So you can click on them. You can find the senators in your area. You can actually look up the committees that you're interested in there. You can see them all. You can see who is in those. So maybe if you are doing something similar to CASA and you want to pull it in for means of conversation, you can see it all right there.
So preparing early for your meeting is essential. You want to identify each legislator, as we mentioned, and select those committees or what else you can find on them. So any interests or relevant legislature that they've signed onto in the past. What are their key interests essentially, and how does that connect, or can you find a way to connect that to your work? Any commonalities between you, whether it's a personal connection or whether it's something specifically to do with your work, which obviously is a little bit more helpful. But just those little tidbits often kind of help foster a better relationship between yourself and the legislator. Knowing these prior to showing up is very helpful to know what you're going to talk about. You also want to select your goal. What is your point here? What is your key message? What talking points can you come up with? What are you looking to get done? And I think having that and going through your meeting with that key message in mind is essential. Always tying those talking points back to what you're there and intending to talk about, because oftentimes you can definitely get derailed onto totally different subjects. And outreach to arrange the meetings should also occur in this preparatory stage very early as well. So you can email or you can call at least 1 month in advance. These are often times where everyone's trying to meet with the legislator, and they're very busy. They've got the budget to look over, they've got a bunch of different things going on, and you guys aren't the only ones that are meeting with them. So you want to identify what time/date that you're looking for, and put that range on your calendar and keep that at the forefront of your mind as well, so that you can be reaching out in advance. Another step is to find advocates and anybody existing in your community that might be having the same goal or the same purpose. We connect with American Lung, for instance, because they help us to advocate with these legislators when we cannot. So we're there to perform the education, they're there to perform the ask. This has also been very successful with other organizations, youth groups. In this image to the right, we've actually have a teacher in our group so that she can, help talk to the legislator about what they're looking at. So finding those people in the community that can really be those champions, and recruiting those champions throughout the year, not just with the legislative season. It's very helpful to have people on board through the entirety of the year so they know the program work, they know exactly what you guys are looking at, what's been done, and they can promote advocacy. They can promote your program and your advocacy on their own level. It's important to promote these opportunities at program events and potentially online as well, so that you can recruit those community champions that you may not have known exist. Advocating in the community is also important as well, because you want your community members to be on board with what you're doing. Community education is key. We do a lot of vaping panels and other educational opportunities within each of our communities to discuss why this is an issue. This is also things like tabling, informational sessions. We do signage, anything that we can to address the issue at a community level. Because the more people that we have on board, like I said, the more community champions that we have, the better our message is going to be heard. If these legislators are seeing this in their communities, maybe that's going to trigger some action on their part. And cultivating those relationships to further advance the programmatic goals with those community members or those community champions is critical as well. Again, these are going to be, some of your top players. Maybe you don't live in the community that you're trying to advocate or you're advocating or educating about, but you definitely need to move the dial. This is a great opportunity to be able to do that through those community champions who may advocate or lobby on your behalf. So next up, we'll be discussing advocacy work. This is incorporating groups into advocacy, tips for legislative meetings, and your district versus Albany visits. Incorporating groups is kind of a big lift sometimes. Again, we've been talking and stressing about these community champions. You want them with you. You want them at any meeting that you can possibly have because, again, it's their community perspective. We're, doing this. This is our job, but these are people that are very passionate about this that might not be, necessarily paid or they're taking their time, and that definitely speaks to the importance of the program. We also want a lot of group preparation. This can start months in advance, and for my group, Reality Check, it does. We are currently starting to prep for Legislative Education Day, LED, which is occurring in March. So that's how far in advance we're going. For this group preparation, we sit down and assess our goals. What are we there for? We assess these key messaging and takeaway points, as well as what does this kind of look like during the meeting. We do a lot of prep. For the day of, we have cheat sheets. So each youth receives an index card which has information as to their selected talking points, just as a reminder. I know sometimes it's easy to talk about our programs all day long, but for people that are those community champions, or particularly with youth, it can feel really overwhelming being in the room with a legislator. It's their moment to shine, and they've never had this experience before potentially. So if they're stumbling or running into a roadblock with remembering what they're trying to discuss, the cheat sheets are definitely very helpful. It's also important to review any potential questions that they might have or the legislator might have. So in our beginning and prep stages, we definitely come forward and try to have the youth, first of all, discuss what are they interested in learning from the legislator? What does this kind of look like for them? And then we also look at what potential questions do you think they might have for you? So navigating that ahead of time and anticipating those questions prevents anyone from kind of stumbling or saying the wrong thing. As we had discussed earlier, it's really easy to border on that line of education versus lobbying. And so particularly for our youth who are associated directly with our program, we have to navigate that ahead of time to prevent any issues. And we do host mock legislative meetings as well. So one of us will be the legislator, and we will have kind of this dialogue far in advance so that it's not as nerve-wracking going into the meeting.
So, as we mentioned, we wanted to go over some tips for district versus Albany visits. And realistically, we have a little kind of meeting tips for all visits that you kind of should follow, and then spaced out for district versus Albany. So, for all visits, show up early. That's like the number one. If nothing else, show up early. This is especially true for Albany because it's two things. They're hard to navigate. So if it's your first time in Albany doing visits, there's a lot of people, a lot of offices, and it's confusing from soup to nuts. So you definitely want to make sure that you are showing up early, you know where you're going, you're comfortable. And then you also show up early because, especially, again, this is for district in Albany, but especially for Albany as well, you're on a tight time constraint. So what district, maybe you get a half hour, maybe you get an hour if you're lucky. Albany, you're getting 15 minutes, and Mary will go into this a little more, but it's a very short time frame. So if you show up early and somebody happened to end early, or they're willing to start early, that's a few extra minutes that you can connect with your legislator and have that extra impact. So definitely show up early. Same goes for district as well. If you've never been to their office, sometimes they can be challenging to find, even in small buildings. Like, find your legislator, be comfortable, and be prepared and ready. Be prepared to meet with a staffer or a legislator. So don't be disappointed if you meet with a staffer. They are just as great as the legislators in terms of hearing what you have to say. And a lot of times staffers have a little more time to dedicate. So they may be able to ask more questions, or they may have been able to research ahead of time, which will be nice. But like Mary has said, and we'll probably mention a good 10 more times, is knowing your focus and having that end goal. These meetings are scary and stressful, especially if this is something you're not comfortable with. So make sure you know that end goal and you understand what you're going there for. Because like she said, there will be legislators who will say, what is your ask? Why are you here? And you need to know what your answer is to that. Same goes with education versus lobbying, making sure that you're staying on the left side with the education and you're not falling into that lobbying category. And on top of that, also just being able to guide the conversation to accomplish your goal. So if you do go with group members, it could be 2 or more. Make sure you're designating them and know who's speaking from your group. So this could be in terms of just different topics. Like she mentioned, they do index cards with the youth. For myself, I've been to meetings with our telehealth project manager before, who is another rural health network development program. So it's important to kind of go off of each other. Obviously, I'm not going to talk on behalf of telehealth. That wouldn't make sense. But it's great for us to bounce off of each other and then kind of merge into why AHI is great. It's a nice collaboration piece. But understand who's doing what so you're not fumbling over each other. Leave takeaway items. I always think this is a big thing. I am one who loves tchotchkes when I go places. They will stand out to me, whether I use them or not. They're going to make an impact. And so Mary has a picture here of Big Tobacco Can't Hide Facts. It's bright red. It stands out. You can't miss it. That's a good item. I'll also show you in a few slides the 2019 to 2021 ARHN Executive Summary, which is something that we leave behind. It's a great impactful piece. It talks about the data of our communities and some of the programs that ARHN offers. And then we always leave other pieces of things we're working on. And then follow up after your meeting. So I know you can't read the letter on the right, but this was actually a letter that Matt Simpson, Assemblyman Matt Simpson, wrote to the speaker last year. So Speaker Carl Heastie. Basically, we had a meeting with him. We followed up. We said, thank you so much for meeting with us. This has been great. I really hope you take away these, key education points. And he sent this back and said, this impact is great. I want to support your cause. I truly believe in it. I'm going to send this letter along. So could he have sent that letter without us following up? Yes. But that follow-up may have also prompted him to do that. So just a little extra step can go a long way. And then for specific to district visits, 2 important reasons why it might be nice to go to district visits, but also things you can kind of curb in is the personalized visit. So with a district visit, you can kind of utilize where you are and what programming you've done in that area. Have you impacted something down the street? A few years ago, I met with Betty Little and we were able to tell her, like, look, we did a whole food program and we helped this many community members at the Glens Falls Farmers Market down the street. And so I think it's just a little more impactful, especially when it's a place that they're going often and they're very familiar with. Mary has probably been able to say many times, like, we've been able to do tobacco-free this and this all throughout housing, whatever it may be. And here's where it impacts the community you're in currently. Another good reason district visits are awesome, and another thing to incorporate when you're at them is the intimate look at the legislator. So pay attention to what you're seeing on the walls, on the table. Do they have specific artwork that's consistent? Are there things that you did not know about them that are standing out? Mary told me as we were preparing for this, Mary told me a story of one of her youth that went with her saw a plaque on the wall that showed that the legislator had played basketball for a college, just so happened to be the college that the kid was going to. And so they were able to connect on a different level because they were able to talk about the college that he currently went to and connect with the legislator on that and talk about basketball. And just a little added piece kind of gives you that reminder factor. So definitely use those cues. And then we'll go into Albany, but the other thing is with the meeting tips, we are having a toolkit available as well. So there are NYSAR's legislative meeting tips in the toolkit, which gives you a little further in-depth options for what to do when you're in meetings.
Albany is a bit of a different beast. Albany is a lot of stress if you don't know what you're doing and have not completely adequately prepared. It's important with your Albany visits or what you're planning to know the legislative days and choose the appropriate date to attend. Sometimes for, us, we went and there was bail reform. Now, those things don't necessarily play hand in hand, but there was also a lot of other youth-focused organizations who were meeting with legislators, which did play nicely with our agenda. So know what you're looking at. Who are you competing with? What else is on those legislators' plates for the day based on, who else is advertising their attendance for that date. You also want to create a realistic schedule. Don't put yourself in back to back to back meetings just so you can get it over with or to maximize your time. That's not completely realistic. Sometimes your meetings will be, 5 to 10 minutes. Sometimes it'll be a half hour. It's hard to judge before that meeting how long this is actually going to take. And where in the building are you going? What floor are you on? What room are you going to? What does all that look like? Certain legislators might be meeting with another program before yours, which might take precedence for them, and you might be pushed out. Seen a lot of different things happen. So creating a realistic schedule with a little buffer of time in between those appointments and meetings is very important, so you don't overwhelm yourself or anyone else you're going with. Ahead of time, again, like I said, Albany is a little bit confusing. So you want to make sure that you know where you're going. Find the location and prepare for parking and or, shuttles if necessary. Parking in Albany can be a nightmare. So arriving early and making sure that you have this information prior to that is definitely important. On the next slide, we'll show you guys a map, which is also included in the toolkit, which can help you get around a little bit better. But this is definitely something that I would stress. Our group is very fortunate and we usually get dropped off, but obviously that's not something that's possible for every group. But I would encourage you to potentially explore that option if at all possible. Our group also uses the well, which as you come into the legislative office building is at the bottom of this large stair area to put up some educational materials and very interactive items so that anyone that's coming in and out can look at this. We invite our legislators down to look at these items, and as you can see, the gentleman here is reviewing some of our literature. But we also try to make it as catchy and appealing as possible so that people spend time exploring, what is this? What does this mean? We do that obviously because it's nice to have people in our display, but we also do it to kind of illustrate some of the tactics that Big Tobacco uses to lure people to use their products, which is definitely beneficial for us. But that education that takes place in the well, as well as those interactive props, is definitely very helpful. But the most important thing to note about Albany visits is they are often very short and concise. So it's very important to stand out. I met with Dan Stuck a few years ago, and he had, he was talking about what does this mean? Why do these Albany visits, kind of make the difference sometime? And he said the number one thing to consider for him is the eye catchiness of it all. So our group usually has been going in red for the past few years, and the bright red matching T-shirts. From his perspective, was one of the most memorable things for him. Seeing all of these people that are involved with the same mission, wearing the same shirts that were bright and eye-catching, were important for him. Now, that's not always possible for every program or grant, but if you can stand out in any way possible, you should try to do so. So here's our map of the area. So on the left, you can see the concourse and the different entrances to go in. You can also see the location of the well and the LOB. You have to go through security for some of these areas, so it's definitely important, again, to buffer some of your time. On the right, this is the parking lots and essentially how to manage your parking situation on the day of.
And for both of these maps, they are linked here on the slides. They're also in the toolkit with the links to where we accessed them. A lot of these you can find from simple Google search as well. So if it may not be something here, it may be easier if you want to be like on a virtual option where you're walking the floor, they may have that. You just kind of play around and see what you find. So keeping legislators informed. So we kind of talked about prepping, actually executing that work, being in those meetings, and then it's this chunk of time where you're not meeting with the legislator. So, what's keeping them knowledgeable about your program? What is making them want to stay with your program? And why do they feel that your work is important? So, providing consistent updates to legislators is huge. Um, as I mentioned a few slides above when I was talking about leaving those takeaways, we have the 2019 to 2021 executive summary here. This is something that ARHN puts out every 3 years. It's a nice contemplation of everything we work on, programming. We actually have, as you see in here, the ARHN region snapshot. So again, that covers the 7 counties. We also have it for every individual county throughout our region. And then it kind of goes into why the work with our public health departments and hospitals are important. So this is something we leave with them. They love it. This is something we also provide to partners. I did link it here so you could see how we do things. Just as a way to keep them informed, that's a good takeaway for us without doing any extra work because this is already getting done. Another thing that ARHN's working on for this year, and hopefully every year from here out, is an annual newsletter. So we do meet them, like I said, February, March time is our meetings. So maybe having a newsletter that comes out in November, December is a perfect time. You're grabbing their attention. So when you go through and they're like, Rural Health Network, why does that sound familiar? Oh yeah, because I just got their newsletter X number of months ago or a few weeks ago. And so they're able to connect things. Same goes for your program, acknowledging where you stand in the budget so they can be familiar with the name will stand out. And then lastly, subscribing to legislator newsletters. So here I'm subscribed to Senator Dan Steck's newsletter. I think this is a great way, as we've mentioned probably several times now, Mary, one of the things that CASA really does well is focuses on what the legislators are about, what do they support, what are their committee memberships so they can bring it into conversation. This is a great way to do that. So this was actually one of his newsletters that came out. I just took a snippet from his email, but you can see support for agriculture, Paul Smith's college visit. He's supporting these programs. So if this is something that aligns with you, great conversation piece.
And it's also important to provide these consistent updates. So invite your legislators to major program events. For ARHN, this could be the Leadership Summit that's hosted annually. For CASA, we also do an annual smoke-free movie showing, which we invite our legislators to. This might not be something that they attend, but if they know that it's out in the community, this is what's happening, it kind of shows that initiative on your part that you're consistently trying to make sure that they have knowledge of what's going on within your program. And it's wonderful if they do attend. You get that photo. For them, that's great press. For you, that's also great press. So, it's a great opportunity. Providing consistent program updates as well. So when writing or emailing, meeting with your legislator, having those recent successes as a highlight is definitely awesome as well. So we do on a monthly basis, we try to reach out to our legislators and tell them, this is what happened this month. And do we always have something to say? Not necessarily. We don't always have like the best, biggest, freshest news, but just kind of keeping in touch with them and letting them know that we're still here, think about us, is definitely very important. Around the holiday time, we have sent cards, usually with our monthly letters. We also try to send any photos or articles that we've been published in, that kind of stuff, that any way that we can think possible to highlight our program. It's also really valuable to have those youth or community member statements. So as we've talked about, those community champions are critical. The legislators are thinking about who is their constituents and what do they want. Here's what you guys want, but what do the people that are voting actually want? So having those statements from adults, youth, anyone is very important. There are several different types of statements that you can put together that we've done in the past, and probably way more that people can imagine and create. But we have done signed statements. So this is something that we've written and we've left the bottom open and available so that the person can write or sign their name, where they're from, etc. And that's something that they don't have to necessarily dive into or spend a lot of time creating. This is great, but this is not as personal as legislators often enjoy. Personal statements are often what get the job done and done well. So on the right, these are a bunch of personal statements from teenagers. So I do a lot of tobacco education in our county, Saratoga, Warren, Washington. And so with our health classes, we had youth kind of write at the end of these presentations, what are you guys feeling? What are you thinking? How is this going for you? What is the toll of tobacco on your life? And we compiled all of these responses into these booklets, which we provided each of our legislators with. This was phenomenally received. Like all the legislators were very happy to have these personal handwritten, in their own words, statements from youth. Now, is this necessarily working for every program? No, but if you could even get, one or two people on board to provide at some point during the year, it doesn't even necessarily have to be within this legislative sustainability season, as we like to refer to it as. But those personal statements, again, might push those messaging and education that you have carefully crafted over the edge, and help that legislator understand that this is more than just you, more than just whoever you're there with. That it is a community-wide interest and initiative.
One thing I'll also say, like Mary said, speaking to the leadership summit, and inviting people to programs, I do highly recommend that piece. We have not always had someone attend the summit that is a legislator or a staffer, but it's been pretty consistent that we've had at least one at every summit. So in 2019, the last time we were in person, Billy Jones came and he had his staffer with him, and they were fantastic. They spoke with a lot of our partners. We took pictures. If you attended this year's leadership summit, you would have seen a picture of Billy Jones and Molly sitting at the top of our page a little bit as part of our banner. So like she said, it's great press for both of you. And it really speaks to them caring about your mission and why it's important to keep these consistent updates and make your program stand out, because they're going to be more likely to come to your events. Also, Betty Little's staffer, Catherine, she used to come to everything. She would always be at all of our events. So those are huge things. And I feel like it's such a big step. And if legislators are watching, it's such a big step for you to come. It's so important to us, but it truly is something that there's no harm in asking. So I highly recommend that, is no matter what, put it out there for them to come. And then, as I mentioned, the newsletter. So on the right is what I'm working on for the newsletter. It's not finalized yet because our year is not over yet. And so this will be one of the items that we actually mention on there. So one of these, the reason this is important is keeping them informed, right? That's what we keep saying over and over again. But why? If they know why the funding of your program is so important, they're more likely to support you. So with that, how does your program impact? So as Mary said, having those key community members talking. In past years, when we did like I mentioned before, the food program with Glens Falls Farmers Market, we had actual quotes and feedback from our community members who received vouchers for the food pantry and the farmers market, stating, thank you so much. This is why it helped my family. And we were able to provide those. So having that little piece is huge. And then knowing your numbers, I think, is the next biggest thing you can offer. Who, how many, and where. How many people are you affecting? Where is it taking place? When you start telling them it's taking place in their community, their ears are going to perk up, because those are their constituents. Why? Like, you're helping them. If you're helping them and they're helping the legislator, everyone's happy. And so if you look at the newsletter on the right, you can see the top 3 things I talked about on this page, but it's the Regional Healthy Food Guide, the resources for supporting LGBTQ well-being, and grant writing training. So just as a little hit, this year we created a Regional Healthy Food Guide in collaboration with several of ARHN's partners. And the guide hit on farmers markets and CSAs and basically provided resources and information and all the partner available programs to help increase access to fresh fruits and vegetables. So this goes out to our community members, this goes out to our partners. We have an accompanying website. That's huge. It's a great piece for anyone. So this is something that A, we would definitely want in the newsletter, and B, this is a piece that we would actually give to the legislator and say, look at what we're doing. It has our logo on it. It stands out. It's got all the websites so they can check it out because they may love it also. So these programs, the newsletter right now is about 4 pages of just different things, but it's just quick highlights. Here are the things we've worked on. Here are the numbers, and here's where to access them. So something to keep in mind. And when this newsletter does go out, it will go out to all the partners. We will make sure to include you on the list just so you can see how we're doing things. And then for keeping partners informed, so the previous pieces that we've talked about is keeping legislators informed as well, but keeping partners informed is just as important. They help guide your work. A lot of us are collaborating with our partners, and if you're not, you should definitely attempt it because I think partner organizations can truly lift up your initiatives. And so with that, ARHN has done signed letters. So we have done in the past blurbs about ARHN, why it's important. Do you believe in our mission? Do you support us and want to collaborate with us? Was kind of the brief outline of the letter. And we provided that to our partners and received like hundreds back. And the good thing for this was we were able to take these letters and compile them and then show the legislators, look, here's hundreds of letters from our partners saying why they think our program is important. So it's not just us speaking. You've got community members speaking, and now you have organization leads talking about why they feel ARHN stands out. So that was a big piece. Hudson Mohawk AHEC recently reached out and asked if they could use our name, title, and logo to do a similar type of partner support option, which is another great opportunity. Because signed letters, I don't know if all of you deal with this, but I know a lot of times when you're asking for something to be signed, there's a lot of approval processes. Is it going up to your executive level? Is it going to a different office depending on how your program works? So sometimes the name, title, and logo is much easier to navigate, and it's easier for partners to say, yes, go ahead, we want to be a part of this. So I thought that was a great option. I know all the AHECs did it, but it just happened to be Hudson Mohawk reached out to us. But so those are 2 options of ways you can reach out. If anybody's interested in this stuff, I can always connect you to Kelly Owens, who is the executive director for Hudson Mohawk AHEC, or send you the email to kind of give you an idea of how she did it, things like that.
Also, in keeping partners informed and included is a wonderful tool that we have, obviously, is social media, but also our websites as well. Keeping that updated with things that we have that are going on and information on how people can get involved. You can see on the right our website for the CASA program. We have a take action link so that you can help with whatever level that you're comfortable with. We include some information to write a letter to the editor, but we also have a petition that's a quick link for people to just enter their information and sign that petition virtually. So this is a very quick way for people to demonstrate their support, for partners to demonstrate their support on our behalf, to then illustrate in some of these legislative meetings. So I would definitely recommend having something, a virtual option, because sometimes, even those steps, those signed letters, whatever, take a little bit of time, again, and approval as well. So having something that's available not just to partners, but to the community is definitely important.
And not everyone's comfortable with reaching out to a legislator or joining you during your meeting and being part of your group. So the sign-on petition that they have is fabulous. It's a quick, easy sign-on. It doesn't take long. And I think it takes away the concern with people who may be shy or not comfortable fully voicing that. So I thought this was fantastic. I highly recommend having a take action link somewhere if you would like to include that.
So thank you for attending today's webinar on advocacy in our rural communities. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat now.
This recording will also be available and it will be archived on the ARHN webpage. I would definitely say give us a week or so just to go through the communications process of getting it up. But so this, as well as that toolkit we mentioned, and the toolkit does include, I'm trying to go through it in my head, it includes the education versus lobbying, a little more in detail. It includes that meeting tips from NISAR. It includes the maps. It includes different pieces that we've found that are just key pieces on our end. And again, this is stuff we've learned from our meetings. This is stuff that we've seen, we've researched. Like I said, the New York State Association for Rural Health has put it out. I know Bureau of Tobacco Control gives Mary lots of things. So I think a lot of those tools are in there also. I think we have an infographic from them as well, just as ways that they have presented data and facts to legislators. So regardless, if you don't even have any questions, this will all be available. I will send it out to all attendees as soon as it's available on the webpage. And I'll send out the toolkit after this, but just simple tips and tricks. We were trying to make it more of a 101 just for anyone who maybe doesn't do advocacy or just wants a little refresher of reminder as we're coming up to the season and we're kind of in it now. So if you have any questions and you don't feel comfortable asking in the chat, you can always reach out to Mary or myself after this. Or when I send the email, feel free to respond. I would highly recommend just hitting reply and not reply all, but you should be good to ask any question you'd like. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, so I think we're good to give you back a few minutes and then end the meeting. I think we're good. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and archive this and you guys will see it soon.